Thank you so much for joining today. I2I has been putting out the Pakistan Startup Ecosystem Report for the past how many years?
Decade now.
A decade now, like a 10-year and consistently, which is something I think is highly appreciated and much needed. This doesn't happen otherwise, right? Um, Sarah, you've recently joined
It's
I2I.
been a year now.
Well,
I've lived 10 years in this 1 year.
Chalo, in that past, so 10% of I2I's journey
Yeah.
is still through you. Why do you guys put this out every year? Who's the audience? How does this help the ecosystem?
So, the Pakistan Startup Ecosystem Report is one of I2I's signature products. Like you mentioned, it's been coming out for the past decade. This is the fifth edition. And I've also asked a similar question because I'm a former journalist, so I naturally gravitated towards this publication that I kept hearing about, which everyone was using to make a case, to kind of, for the programs that they were running or to identify problems. And that's when Kulsum kind of mentioned that it came about when she was working with the World Bank, and they were looking for all of these data points that just didn't exist. And this is a sentiment that I've repeatedly heard from every stakeholder. Founders say they don't have reliable data. Investors make the same complaints. Then anybody foreign who's interested in the economy or the market, they obviously want to study it, but the information is all over. So the idea is to have one standardized, data-driven knowledge product that benchmarks the Pakistani entrepreneurial ecosystem and looks at it from different lenses, because an economy is impacted by multiple factors, right? There's your infrastructure, policy, investors.
Yeah.
There's many sides to the table, and this report is our attempt to study it holistically, understand where we are, why we are there, and what the path forward looks like.
Okay, perfect. So if you could give me a bird's eye view of what all is covered in this report,
Okay.
and then we can go through each section separately. But so yeah, what all does this report cover?
I think Amna should take that.
Yeah.
She's the lead author, so
Yeah.
take us through that.
Okay, so first of all, before delving into that, what exactly the report covers, I think I can perhaps step back a bit and talk about the dimensions through which we've tried to cover this report. So we have used a diagnostic framework developed by Andy, which is a very standardized way on how you map and assess that how healthy a particular entrepreneurial ecosystem is within a country. So that framework of Andy consists of 8 dimensions. Now, so it's policy, infrastructure, markets, culture, research and development, and
Finance.
finance and policy.
Okay.
So, and if you really look at the way that these are structured, some of them are direct, some of them are indirect, and many of them are partially direct. So the way they're structured, and if you look at that, you would actually understand that they sort of cover everything altogether and how the interplay comes together and can directly or indirectly impact innovation and entrepreneurship in any country. So traditionally, the report used to cover 4 to 5 dimensions at a length, and it was a combined way of looking at it. This time, we took the decision that since the ecosystem in itself has matured and evolved, so now you need to have more of a zoomed out perspective, where you can not only talk about the ecosystem and try to understand that how it's working, but also you can actually pin it down in the larger economical context and framework. Because of course, entrepreneurship, innovation, by the end of the day, startups are also like kind of small to medium businesses.
Yeah, of course.
And they exist in a larger framework of how the economy is, working or functioning or progressing, and you just cannot take it out in a silo, small island and just try to understand that how it's working. So the idea was to actually not only cover and understand how these 8 dimensions are working in their own capacity, but how they are impacting how innovation is right now progressing.
Okay.
So
I understand how the framework is, and I'm glad that you've broadened it from before. So again, if we could let's dive into the report, right? The idea is that if someone who has not yet read the report and all, the idea of this conversation is to give them a good insight into what to expect from it, what all it covers. So if we can let's just begin with that, right? So what all does this report cover besides what you just told me? Like if I were to take the content pages and then go through it, and then let's dive into the specifics.
So I think there's a lot. There's a lot and lot and
No,
lot
it's
to
a very thick
unpack.
report. I've seen I've seen the physical copy.
And we've done primary and secondary research both, so that adds an additional level of nuance because you'll have direct quotes from people who are literally building this ecosystem. In addition to what Amna said, we're looking at different factors, right? We're looking at the funding landscape. We're looking at what support organizations look like now. There was a time when Pakistan had 1 or 2 incubators not that long ago.
Yeah.
And now we are in hundreds, right? So depending on what your interest in this space is, I think there is something for everyone. Then one of my favorite bits is culture.
Okay. What all so let's start with the culture bit, right? So what all does that cover?
So culture essentially looks at all of your surrounding factors in a society that determines its attitude towards entrepreneurship. And a lot of factors contribute over there.
Okay.
Our societal structures where entrepreneurship is seen as something that's very risk prone, whereas we are a very risk averse society.
Yeah.
So people would rather any young person would rather go into a traditional company where there's a guaranteed paycheck and be like, yes, I'm doing well at life. Whereas to be an entrepreneur, it's really rough. It's very glamorized, but it's very rough. Also, the kind of family businesses that we've had in this space, it's very surprising to me that this economy is comprised of 60 to 70% small and large family businesses, but in terms of the storytelling around it, it's a little bit of a dark box, right? You have all these great entrepreneurs, but what they went through, the heroes that emerge out of it, the media has not really done a great job at bringing those stories through. So that's another aspect that
Do you
we're
think
tackling.
there's also a reluctance because people don't want to share their stories? Because I was recently reading this, right? How FBR is now sending notices to business that
Is
came
that
on
true?
Shark Tank.
Yeah.
I don't know how true that is, right? Because I haven't read that from a credible source.
Yeah, same.
But honestly, if someone is underreporting their income and then over-reporting it on TV, I would expect this to happen anywhere, right? So I don't blame a FBR or any tax authority, but there seems to be this general reluctance to share regardless because people feel unsafe in sharing how well they're doing. Or do you see that's a big part of it, or do you think there's just a lack of interest, or there's no one willing to even ask them what they're up to?
I think it's a combination of different things. The first is much more concrete, and we also touch upon that in the report, which is about the informal markets or the undeclared economy that exists in Pakistan and is thriving.
Yeah.
So almost 80% of what's going into people's bank accounts, we don't know about it. And when you come out and speak about the scale of your business, you have to be honest and transparent about those things too. So there is a general discomfort with being open and public about it. Dusra part I feel is, as a nation, we're really bad at storytelling. What good stories have we told about our history, about our artists? We usually wait for people to die to even start speaking positively about them. So I don't think it's limited to entrepreneurship. I think that's generally like a bigger problem with us. And I think it's time to change that. And we are seeing that with things like shows like Shark Tank, which is still very business focused, but I think there is a lot more room to do human-centered storytelling with our entrepreneurs, because it's incredible what they go through, what they turn around, and what they build.
Yeah, Pakistan is an extreme sport, right? And doing entrepreneurship here is just harder.
Right.
You have to do so much more that most of the markets, or at least developed markets, already take for granted, and things just happen there. Okay, so we've covered culture. One part of the report which often gets the most highlighted is the fundraising part, right? How has that evolved, changed in Pakistan, and what trends have you seen?
Okay, so like Sarah mentioned, that there were 3 ways in which we collected data. Number one were the direct surveys, the quants that we were collecting. Then to supplicate that, we were doing these one-to-one interviews and focus group discussions. Now, while we were doing the one-to-one interviews with the founders especially, so the answers to the questions came out in a very cookie cutter, in a controlled environment, because those were recorded interviews. But when we took these conversations to the focus groups, the real magic in content and data was there. The way, I mean, there was this one focus group which was timed for 1.5 hours. It ran for 4 or 5 hours actually.
4 or 5 hours?
5 hours actually. And even then we had to pull ourselves out of that room. So now, if I have to break it down, that what the founders are looking for when it comes to fundraising. So typically what was happening 4 to 5 years back, that everyone just wanted to do fundraising. They just wanted to raise funds, take up their idea from an ideation phase to an MVP level, and then gain some traction, and then go to a next round. So that was the course of action that most of the entrepreneurs entering into the stream were looking at. The founders that we are seeing right now, which by the way still haven't made it to the mainstream pipeline of the founders that you see around you, that are spoken about, that are covered, these are the founders who have been through the way of doing business in a particular sector or a particular field, and they know their stuff well. And over the time, they have sort of matured either from a services-based business, or they were working with someone in a relatively, in a capacity where they were the prime decision makers, and then they made that decision to start up something of their own.
Okay.
They're making money. Their unit economics is pretty much positive. They're sustainable. Now they want to scale the business or grow it, and that is where, more than the funding, because please remember this, they're already making money and they know how to make money.
They're cash flow positive businesses.
Yes,
they're
making
growth
good
capital.
money.
Yeah.
Yes. Now what they're looking for, they need the kind of investment or the kind of investors that they're looking for is someone who can provide them with advisory more than the capital, or capital coupled with advisory with the intent that they're looking for IPOs, they're looking for exits, they're looking for mergers, acquisitions. Now, by having these kind of conversations with these founders, it tells you that overall not only the ecosystem has matured, but the level of ask has evolved as well. But on the supply side of the capital, do we have that kind of supplication over there? So this is one gap that we saw happening. Now, if you take the conversation to the other side of the table, which would be the investors, and then you ask them that what are typically the challenges that you are facing. So without quoting anyone, I would say that more than one investor spoke about this, that the quality of the pipeline is not that good. While we are going through an economical reset and we see the trickle of funding, going up, still the level and quality of the founders that they have been exposed to is not good.
So let's also bring the accelerator in, right?
Yeah.
So you are actively supporting a bunch of founders, the cohort, and you help them raise.
Right.
Before this, you had the We Raise program with IFC, World Bank, and you guys supported a lot of female entrepreneurs.
With raising capital.
With raising capital
Yes.
specifically. And now the program is different. But the point is that you're seeing those entrepreneurs, you're seeing their mindset.
I think it's a sense of mystery.
Okay.
I feel like there is a big space in the middle that's missing in terms of understanding what each party is looking for from the other. So investors make the same complaints. They want to speak to founders. They want to have as many conversations as possible. But then when they speak to founders, the information that's presented to them is either not relevant, it's not accurate, it's not updated. They don't understand the fundamentals because an investor is looking in you to make money, right?
Of course.
And you have to understand how to make that case in front of an investor within minutes. And if you've lost that touch point, then you're done. And on the other side, founders have put investors on this pedestal where they just kind of, I feel like they're very intimidated, but don't understand the basics that go into a good pitch deck, into how even basics like constructing a conversation, the kind of professionalism that's expected of them, not ghosting investors, not flooding them with repeated messages. And then there's also a bigger problem where access is not democratized, right? Like anybody who gets to a VC is either through 6 degrees of separation where someone does an intro, or they're in tier 1, 2, 3 cities where they can go to an event and actually run into a VC and make their case or find their email, which is why we built one of our other tools, which is a data platform that Amna is also behind. And the whole point behind that is, the vision is that we create this level playing field where if you're a founder, you go and upload your business, your profile, and then the same on the investor front.
Yeah.
And then based on your search criteria, which could be anything, it could be your investment thesis, stage of business, vertical, you're able to contact each other. And then how that conversation plays out is dependent on you based on your business's merit, how viable you are. But at least that first point of contact can be facilitated by ESOs like I2I and many others.
Okay, no, that's quite interesting. Because we also did this exercise, and that was just essay because I felt like there's something that needs to exist with Mutahir at Data Darbar. This was a couple of years ago. Where we just put out a list of every single investor across the world who has ever invested in Pakistan, and just what they invested in, who they are, etc. And you just put it out there. There was a lot of interest, but again, I think a lot of entrepreneurs do not know that they can reach out, even a cold email. Like, it's probably the lowest risk, highest potential outcome thing you can do.
Yeah.
Right? It's a completely asymmetric return. You can send that email out. At worst, you're exactly where you are. At best, you have this new conversation or new thing open, right?
But at the risk of sounding like a broken record, that's also a failure in storytelling, right? You're unable to make that initial pitch where the investor is interested in you, your business story, your story. And most investors tell us that they're looking at founder quality. They want somebody who's driven, who can get the job done, who has the relevant experience. Founders will tell them everything but that. And that's actually one of my favorite pieces of the accelerator, where we help them connect with their core story. And that's when the magic happens. Because then they're able to pivot also, because they understand that it's the problem that they're solving. It's not the product that they need to be married to. So I feel like storytelling is a superpower. It serves you at many different touch points. And that's another space where our academia is failing us, which is also another element that we address.
It's a better skill, right? It's something good storytelling can help you in any walk of life.
Every walk of life.
Exactly. It's something like sales. It's very important. Okay, now moving on. I just want to ask one more question on fundraising, and you can check the report or the numbers if you want to be more accurate. What are the number of deals that happened? How much capital came into Pakistan? This report covers which period again?
The last one was in 21, so it covers 22, 23, and 24.
24 till which month?
November.
November 24.
Yes.
It's updated till November 2024. So how has funding, and this is a very crucial time because all funding has just dropped, right? I would like to know more.
37 million?
Yeah, it's 37 million and 74 million in 23, and then 355 million in 22.
22 was 355 million.
Yes.
23 is 74 million. And 24 is 37 million.
24 is 37 million till November 24. Because if you add the 5.5 million, the
LAM
one
just raised,
done, so that makes it 42 million.
So 42 million अगर मैं उसमें लगा लूँ. Now, how many deals is this broken down over? 10 deals.
Adding this one would make it 11.
11 deals, 42 million. So average is 4.5. So that's a big chunk, right? How many investors? Are they foreign? Are they Pakistani?
It's a mix.
It's a mix.
Yes, it's a mix of foreign and local, and that's what the trend is also showing.
Yes.
And another big shift in funding that the report covers is the stage of funding that's now coming in. So in the initial years, it was more seed, pre-seed level, smaller size checks. But now the rounds that startups are raising is either Series A or pre-Series A, which is a much heftier check. And it's also a signal to like having mature companies that are able to go on and raise these larger rounds.
All these companies that raised the earliest seed series, etc., are now mature enough to raise. Like they can, and that's showing in the data. And that also signals the cycle of maturity, right? Not just for these companies, but also for the ecosystem as a whole. Because if you look at the conversation from a few years ago, we were still wondering if we can sustain this momentum in early stage capital. Now we've moved on to a stage where we are talking about medium stage. And essentially then that creates a pathway to Series B, C, D, and then eventually hopefully exits. No, of course. Do you want to share it? Yeah.
Yeah. In 23, there were a total of 19 international deals.
Yeah.
And at that time, 12 were the ones where mixed investors came in. Now, in 24, the deals done by the international investors have fallen down to 3. And while the ones done by mixed ones have gone to 6.
So when you say 3 international, they're purely international.
Yeah, so they're purely international.
Okay,
so
fine.
when we say mixed deal, so it means that international investors combined with the local investors. So local investors have always tend to be a lower number. But again, this is not only which is the case of Pakistan. This is the case with other emerging economies as well.
Yeah, of course.
And everyone wants, of course, this is a conversation that I see on the blog posts and LinkedIn posts happening from, similar thought leaders from Bangladesh or India, that everyone is pushing for local investors to come in.
Yeah, of course. Uske bagair, we can't do it without local investors, right? No one just ventures into a new market without a local
with
person
vote
that
of
they
confidence
trust.
from your local leads.
Yeah, and is that something that came out? So did you guys also survey foreign investors coming into Pakistan for this report? Yeah. And what were the findings, or what are some of the things that they highlighted as issues for them?
So in 21, in the wake of when suddenly capital was available, and so this was a global phenomenon that was happening. So Pakistan was emerging due to our population numbers and other digital adoption numbers and the good numbers that were coming out at the time. They showed growth. They predicted progression. And at that time, it was considered as a frontier market from the perspective of the international investors. So they looked at Pakistan akin to the next Indonesia or Bangladesh happening. So that is why the money was just to diversify the portfolio and, make a bet into another country. They put down the money over there. Then we had the global, the COVID happened and, funding generally overall came down. And then, of course, we had our own challenges happening in the country as well.
And the political
the macro had the background of the failure of the state and consistency of policy and everything. So what was supposed to be the pivotal moment for the local entrepreneurial system, unfortunately, that didn't work out in that way. And going back to the report, whichever chapter you will go into, there are actually just 2 main chapters that would answer every question. That is infrastructure and then policy. Actually, it's the collective failure of both of these that is also making less capital available. The excess of capital in itself is not an issue. That was made available in 21 and 22. But then due to our own structural problems that run very, very deep, we're just not able to put it into any good use. Because, and I would again go back to culture, when we started exploring, there's a concept of entrepreneurial motivation. And there are 2 components for it. A push factor, that someone who is forced because of the situation that they are in, they're pushed into entrepreneurship. And then there is a pull factor. We've also discussed that into the report, where you're so much self-driven and self-motivated that you're actually a very, very ambitious person.
Yeah.
Traditionally, we think that entrepreneurs in Pakistan, perhaps they're not that much motivated or self-driven. That is one way of looking at it. When you really talk to these founders and people who have been through this system for quite a time, you actually understand that people have that drive, people have that hunger, people have that motivation. But when they look at the macroeconomical realities and the trajectory of the history, so of course they tend to lose the motivation. So actually it all comes down to the lack of policy. The one thing that we always have a consistency around is inconsistency in everything.
Yeah, that's the only constant.
And that is actually the feeding factor into how we want to take a look at it.
No, that's
Please
good.
don't put it.
That's an excellent summary of this as well. So, which brings me to the 2 parts, right? Which is the final 2 parts I really want to discuss. Are number 1, infrastructure. What were your findings around that? Before we come to policy and the recommendations, let's just address infrastructure.
We covered both physical and digital infrastructure.
Yeah.
Amna can take us through. There are big gaps in both. And both impact how startups or any business can operate, how effectively they can operate. My personal pet peeve is the digital infrastructure.
Of course, yeah. So let's talk about the digital infrastructure because that's mostly in the news right now as well.
Yes.
We are struggling with internet. We are struggling with just like access, even when you have internet access to certain websites,
It's
things
the
getting blocked.
quality of access and also the breadth of access. So even with our digital infrastructure, there's still a big rural-urban divide. The progress has been pretty good. We have 3 leading telcos. They've done a really good job. But in terms of access being uneven, I think there's a gender divide and then there's a rural-urban divide that needs to be addressed. And we love quoting these figures of 240 million people and our youth, but what service what service is that youth if they're not fully equipped, right? Like if half of your population doesn't have access to the same tools, those numbers mean nothing. And similarly, even in areas where you do have good coverage, it gets targeted by ridiculous things like frequent outages without any explanation. I think one of the figures that really stand out to me is the severity of the economic loss that we have to incur with one such single day. Pasha put out a figure that stands at nearly 300 million, and our ICT exports are around 3 billion. So we've nearly lost 10% of that with something that is completely avoidable. So we talk about, I think we've always looked at internet outages from a freedom of speech and that lens, but with this report, what we try to bring forth is that it has a very massive economic consequence as well, and we just can't afford to be blind to it anymore. So that's on the digital part. On the physical part, I think it impacts markets and it impacts our e-commerce sector, our logistics sector very severely.
By physical part, you mean the roads, you mean electricity, etc. Yeah, because I had small manufacturers like SME manufacturing, and we had a conversation around that, and their big thing was, man, to manufacture in Pakistan, the first thing you need to do is become a power generation company, right? Second thing you need to do is become a security concern, right? Where you are building a security team, everything around it. So there's just layers of issues that you first solve it, and then you come to where the basics, right? Where just, okay, let me start building my business now.
Right.
So what were the physical things that you saw, and did you see a big difference in the rural and urban physical infrastructure?
The road density that we have in the country, it is relatively good if you compare it with other similar countries. We have good railroad structure as well. We have the ports as well. And then we have a very good and intricate postal network and system as well.
Yeah.
What is largely missing is interoperability. Now, why are they not coming together? If they come together, you have such a good structure already in place that if you just put up dry ports on top of that and make it operational and functional, you can largely solve your logistics problem, your delivery problem, your problem that directly or indirectly impacts the e-commerce sector and the logistics sector. But this is not happening because the policies are not being worked around it.
Okay, no, that makes complete sense. So let's move to the big one, right? Policy. What all do you feel is still hurting? Where do you think changes need to be made, which also comes to the recommendations part?
I think with policy, there is a lot of good that has happened in the past few years.
Yeah.
We have a lot of forward-looking regulators in this space that actually want to come to the table. They acknowledge the potential of this industry, which is a great starting point. They also want to work with stakeholders, which means that they want to understand what the problems are. They've come to us many times. They're like, the founders don't talk to us. Can you tell us what they're struggling with? And that's a very, I think, sacred role that an ESO can play. So if I was to name a few, I think there are some really cool people at SECP who are thinking about these things.
Yeah.
STZA, even State Bank of Pakistan is doing.
Well, State Bank goes up and down. Yeah.
I think in terms of the work, I'm a fan of
some of the work they've done is very
the stuff
good,
and the speed at which they've moved. Their level of engagement is a different topic. I think those we have to kind of bifurcate both. But where I feel things get kind of stuck is that they all have separate jurisdictions, right? And which is very complicated for a startup to follow, comply with. Just simple things like registering, filing for taxes. For a business that's so nimble and has to move so fast, this creates a lot of burden, a lot of compliance burden on them, and that's why a lot of startups don't even want to get into that hassle. So one of the recommendations that the report puts forth is working in a unified way, where we do simple things like standardizing definitions, making one window solutions for startups where all of their needs can be addressed, rather than making them go through all these hoops. So I feel like this is a big area of opportunity, and now that we have like-minded people in all these bodies who want to work together, this is something that we would want to build on at I2I as well.
I want to delve more into policy findings that you did, because I thought what was interesting around interoperability of logistics and our logistic infrastructure, that's very important. Is there anything else that stood out for you guys when you were speaking to multiple policymakers or people who would require like some policy changes to be made?
Yes. So when we did the interview with State Bank, and so NADRA is an organization that we didn't interview for this report, but out of the other conversations...
Why? Were they not available, or did you not interview?
Those were not the stakeholders that we mapped,
okay,
so
fine.
they were not part of that. It's not like anyone said no to us.
Yeah,
that's
fortunately.
good.
Yeah.
That was actually a very cool thing, that people do want to talk. They want to share information, and they want to do it in the spirit of collaboration and creating more transparency, and they also want to share the work that they're doing.
Yeah.
So for instance, some of these regulators were very happy that somebody was finally asking them, because they're usually painted in a very negative light.
Absolutely.
So sorry to cut you, but I think the spirit of transparency and collaboration that we experienced while collecting data over the course of the year was very, very refreshing. And I feel like we need more of these, where we can pool problems, pool solutions, and actually build actionable, like a roadmap out of that.
No, absolutely. Okay, so coming to the roadmap and the bit that I generally like, I don't think I've seen recommendations or detailed recommendations before, right? In the report I mean, there have always been, but what were the recommendations that you guys came on this year?
Oh, I did a really detailed section on it yesterday as well.
I know. I heard that, but for our audience.
So that was one of our sincere hopes, right? It doesn't just get limited to this is what's happening and now do with it what you want. We actually wanted this to be a holistic, solution-oriented approach, where we also propose potential solutions to the problems that we are addressing. And we've mapped it out for different stakeholders. So there's a section for government or public entities, for investors, for the private sector, which I think we haven't spoken enough about, because local companies
I want to dive into that
have a big role to play here. Also ESOs, and then academia. I think those two were my personal favorites. But if I was to recap a few key ones, for the academia, there are some very important lessons, because what we realized was, and if you look at the data along with the surveys and the interviews, something that came through is that the graduates that we're putting out, they somehow don't match market needs. The skill sets that they have are not commercially viable anymore. So they have to align, their academic curriculum with what the market requires, where the market opportunity is. And the world has shifted completely. The kind of MBAs that we're offering anymore, it doesn't even make sense, right? And then how do you put out this workforce and then expect them to go and work in a global arena or raise from international partners? Yeah. So that's one piece. And then the other piece was on the research that's being done locally. There's a lot of focus on just putting out publications and quantity, but we have to shift focus there and kind of prioritize putting out high quality research, which is something that the HEC also backs. I think that was very relevant for academia, I just recapped for government entities, the need for them to work together to offer tax incentives so that we can mobilize more family offices, more local investors, and pump money back into the economy. Similarly, there's a lot of, I think, hue and cry about funds being repatriated, for the ability to repatriate funds by foreign investors.
That,
On the investor front,
I'm interested on those recommendations.
Yeah, it was a little bit bold because the founders feel like the terms that are offered to them are very skewed on one side of the table, and they want more more fairness. I think what can be done over there is we can have standardized processes, but there has to be some kind of flexibility where investors' interests are protected because obviously they're putting in money, they need to do that. But there can be fairness to founders and transparency for founders on the other side of the table. Similarly, they want additional mentorship and operational support because once they get the check, all well and good, but then they get stuck with growth problems. And often the most reliable network that they have are their investors, and they don't get the kind of support that they probably initially anticipated. And the last piece kind of ties into it is to have specific investment strategies for certain sectors that are very localized to our realities. And that's where I think institutional expertise also comes in. When you have an investor who comes from the same industry with the same expertise, they can do a lot more for you in addition to the funding. So that was an interesting one. What else? Am I missing anything?
What about ESOs? What were your recommendations for ESOs?
ESOs need to up their game. So from the time when the ecosystem took off, I think there was just this need to build capacity and bring these founders forward. But now as founders mature, the kind of support services that they require have also matured significantly. So classroom settings, generic programming. I think the founders also told us that when it comes to financial modeling or things that are more strategic, they kind of feel that the ESOs are letting them down. Okay. But when it comes to storytelling and pitching, on the softer side, they derive a lot of value. Okay. And that's just not enough anymore because if you aren't able to move the needle there, that's kind of empty. Similarly, bringing minority founders forth. So that includes women, underrepresented areas. I think ALI still now has a lot of options, but that's just the tip of the surface. You have a lot of really smart founders all across the country, but I'm not confident if you're being able to reach them. And then beyond investors, ESOs also need to have very strong partnerships with corporates, companies.
That helps.
That helps a lot. Yeah, they can test, there's room for acquisition, there's room to pool expertise, simple things like allowing founders to test simple solutions, which is much easier within these bigger companies. And then ESOs also need to think about their own financial sustainability. Most ESOs are dependent on funding, external funding. And then when that runs out, that also limits the kind of support you can extend forward. Yeah. So unless you are financially viable and sustainable yourself, the scope of your support is also going to suffer in terms of longevity and sustainability.
Okay. No, that's quite interesting. Amna, is there anything that you would like to add on the recommendations front?
Yes. Now these amazing reports that are coming out, they're putting out these reports, they're doing collaborations with, Smida did one report with ILO. Those reports are out there, the data is out there, is published, but they're sort of not making the right amount of noise around that knowledge that they're continuously putting out there.
And so did SECP. They also put out that report after their summit.
Now this summit that happened, I think that was, I was very glad that, our regulator is actually taking an initiative in organizing these kind of conversations.
Yeah. No, that's and SECP I feel like has definitely be consistently doing the right things, right? And is constantly open for more feedback, which I really appreciate. So final thoughts on the report. If someone is interacting with it for the first time, so say I'm a foreign investor looking at Pakistan for the first time, which parts of the report are more relevant for me and how should I go about it?
I would say all of it.
Of course,
because it's all connected, right? That's the beauty of it. And what I feel is hugely beneficial is that we're taking a zoomed out approach. So it's not just going to give you a snapshot of where we're at or have been in the past 2 years, but kind of covers the ecosystem in its entirety and all the factors that impact it. And by reading all of it, you not only understand where we are, but also are able to identify the opportunities because every problem in itself is an opportunity, right? So if you're an investor, I would say really look at the potential of human capital, look at the gap on the infrastructure piece and try and understand the immense kudos that goes out to the founders who are actually building in this space.
Yeah,
Because this
yeah.
is what they're up against. So I can't pick and choose. It's like having a kid. I think if you're looking for an accurate representation of where we're falling short, what we are doing well, where the potential lies, and what the next 5 years can look like, this report is probably like your most reliable resource.
No, excellent. Final thoughts from you, Amna?
I think culture.
Culture you feel is the best
Yeah,
part.
anyone
to
should take a look at it and actually know that and try to understand that who are the real founders and people building out of Pakistan.
And how does this market overall function, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
and you know, in the words of Mikey, an international investor from Epic
Yeah.
Angels that we spoke, she said that the female founders that she have come across in Pakistan are a unique species. Just to quote her on this,
Yeah.
because they have to take care of their work, they have to grow a business, they have to take care of the family, kids, and the way our culture and society operates.
It's completely against the grain, right?
Yeah.
Like being an entrepreneur in Pakistan is already hard, and then being a
kind of
woman in Pakistan is also very
resilience.
hard. And
Yeah.
when you mix both of them together, you are in the
even then
extreme
they are-
sport territory. Yeah.
And even then they are able to do it. So even, I mean, she's like, they are just completely different league.
Yeah, no,
altogether.
I know, excellent. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much for this conversation. We will obviously put the report in the description. We will also put any other resources that you want to share. And I hope more and more people can access this. And is there, okay, before we close off, is there anything that you would like to request people in terms of sharing data, etc., that you like, would want to tell people or communicate more startups to share more, or is there something that you would like to request
In terms of sharing the report?
in terms of sharing the data to help you improve the report in the future? Is that something that's very openly that happens? Yeah.
I don't think we struggled
have a
on
long
that
list.
front.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe Amna is better positioned because she was on the front battle
Yeah,
lines.
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so one thing that like we also wanted to do it, and we did it in bits and pieces in terms of how products are happening and how people are attempting to build a product. So when you take the context of Pakistan, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah, of
so you
course.
need to understand that when you're building in a country like Pakistan, you need to have a very specific kind of approach to it, to come and address a certain problem, and then modify it in terms of how it should be adapting in terms of the local appetite. Now, there are people and there are founders who have done it in bits and pieces to some varying degrees of success. So those stories need to come out. More of the, because,
But are they reluctant to share?
they're not reluctant. We're not asking those questions.
Yeah.
And not in that depth.
Okay.
And trust me, founders want to, that's their went out. They want to talk
Yeah,
about
yeah,
it.
they want to talk about
But we are not actually having those kind of, let's say, more specific and technical conversations with them.
Okay.
I think sharing of data has been less of a challenge.
Yes.
When you push founders, they give you the data. I feel like where we need to do a better job is to tell stories with that data. And that's not a founder's, maybe it is a founder's job.
It's a job. Like
But
everyone has
yeah,
to do it together.
it is
yeah.
somebody's job to look at the stories, whether that's a funding trend, a sectoral trend, whatever it is, there's a story behind it. And we need to do better in order to make those stories more accessible, and also something that's a good read for somebody on
Yeah.
like a Sunday morning who's interested in this space, not just doom and gloom. And this report also has a lot of doom and gloom in terms of like gender statistics, innovation statistics, but we've tried to bring through those stories behind the data as well. And I feel like that's where the gap is and we can fill it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you so much for taking us through the report. And we'll put it out there, and hopefully more and more people can take benefit of it. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.